Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. What if the key to life was not control, but surrender? Not imposing will upon the world, but learning to move with it? In the West, we are taught that mastery means domination, that power is the ability to bend reality to our desires. But in the Taoist tradition, true mastery lies in Wuwei, effortless action, the art of aligning with the currents of existence rather than resisting them. Today's episode is a journey into the philosophy of being in the way, a phrase often misunderstood. The Tao is not an obstacle to overcome, nor a force to be manipulated. It is the unfolding of reality itself, and the secret is learning to flow rather than fight. Alan Watts spent his life translating this wisdom for the modern world, showing us that the self is not a separate entity but a movement within the whole. But the insights of Taoism do not exist in isolation. We see echoes of this in Sartre's Existentialism, where freedom is not about imposing will but accepting responsibility for the unfolding moment. In Spinoza's radical determinism, where choice is not a singular act but an expression of countless interwoven causes. In Heidegger's Being in the World, where identity is not an internal possession but a relationship to the surrounding reality. And then there's the paradox of modernity, the age of artificial intelligence, financial systems that exceed human comprehension, and planetary-scale environmental crises. Timothy Morton's hyperobjects describe forces so vast they evade understanding, much like the Tao itself. Complexity theorists like Stuart, Kauffman, and Francisco Varela remind us that control was never real to begin with. The universe is self-organizing, and our attempts at mastery are often illusions. So where does that leave us? If control is impossible, what does it mean to act? If the self is fluid, what does it mean to be? These are not just abstract philosophical questions. They are essential to navigating a world that is changing faster than we can grasp. Perhaps, as the Taoists and Watts suggest, the deepest wisdom is not in grasping at control, but in letting go. To explore more about the concepts and thinkers discussed, including Alan Watts, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Baruch Spinoza, please visit the episode description. Scroll to the end for a link to the episode webpage, where you'll find further resources, book recommendations, and an option to support my work through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support is vital to the continuation of this long-form, independent content. I really appreciate it. The phrase being in the way holds a paradox that reaches beyond language, beyond the dichotomy of effort and inaction, and into the very nature of existence itself. It is not obstruction, not interference, but immersion, a surrender that is not defeat, but a kind of attunement. To be in the Tao is to recognize that we do not move through the world as separate entities imposing our will upon it, but that we are the movement itself, inseparable from the unfolding of reality. Alan Watts saw this distinction as fundamental. The Western mind, conditioned by centuries of philosophical and scientific tradition, has long clung to the notion of the autonomous self, an entity that stands apart from the world and acts upon it. From Descartes' cogito, where the individual is first and foremost a thinker separated from the external world, to the industrial and digital revolutions that sought to mechanize and optimize existence, the West has been enamored with control. The self is imagined as a master, the world its domain, and progress is measured by the degree to which chaos is subdued. Yet, Watts, like the Taoists before him, recognized this as a fundamental misunderstanding. The self is not a sovereign unit operating independently. It is a process, an event, a ripple in the vast, unceasing flow of existence. The illusion of separation between self and world, action and nature, is the very source of suffering. And what is suffering if not resistance to what is? To be in the way, then, is to relinquish this resistance, to dissolve into the rhythm of things rather than futilely swimming against the current. But what does this look like in practice? The answer is Wuwei, often translated as effortless action, a phrase that itself seems contradictory until one experiences its truth. Wuwei is not passivity, nor is it stagnation. It is rather a way of moving through the world that does not seek to force or control, but instead allows action to arise naturally in harmony with the moment. It is the difference between forcing a conversation and allowing a dialogue to unfold, between imposing a solution and letting an answer emerge. It is, as Watts often described, the difference between trying to control the breath and simply breathing. The implications of this perspective ripple through every aspect of life. In work, where ambition is often mistaken for relentless exertion, Wuwei offers an alternative: mastery through presence rather than pressure. In relationships, where control manifests as the compulsion to fix, change, or possess another, being in the way invites an openness to mutual becoming. In technology, where artificial intelligence is increasingly unpredictable, it is a reminder that intelligence is not a thing to be tamed, but a process to be engaged with. And so the invitation remains to step beyond the illusion of control, beyond the desperate grasping for certainty, and into the movement that has always carried us, to dance with life rather than struggle against it, to be in the way. The quiet revolution of perception is not a mere intellectual shift, but an existential reckoning. It unfolds in the spaces between certainty and dissolution, where the self, long imagined as a sovereign entity, wavers in the face of an ever-shifting world. The ancient illusion of autonomy, of a self-contained, discrete existence, erodes under the weight of contemporary philosophy, neuroscience, and physics. What emerges is not just a new understanding, but a demand for transformation, a call to relinquish old frameworks in favor of something more fluid, more attuned to the rhythms of becoming rather than the rigidities of being. To exist is not to occupy a static position, but to move, to flow, to co-emerge with the world. The Taoists saw this long before modern science echoed their insight. Nothing stands still. Resistance to change is resistance to life itself, a futile clinging to an illusion that has already unraveled. Heraclitus, Spinoza, Barrard all trace the same contours of thought. Existence is process, interrelation, a network of dynamic forces ceaselessly entwining. What we call the self is not a thing but an event, not a possession but a participation. And yet, this recognition is not merely philosophical. It permeates the crises that define our era. The global financial system, once treated as a rational machine, now pulses as an evolving, chaotic organism. Climate change, long approached as an external problem to be solved, instead reveals itself as an entanglement, an inexorable weave of human and non-human forces slipping beyond linear control. We have long imagined ourselves as masters, architects of destiny, but the world will not be mastered. The order we seek is not imposed, but emergent, not legislated, but lived. Even within the depths of personal identity, the fractures reveal themselves. Mental health crises surge, the weight of separateness becoming unbearable. The cost of treating psychological distress rises in tandem with the realization that loneliness is not just a personal affliction, but a structural condition. We have built a world around a fiction, the fiction of the isolated self. And now that fiction begins to crack. Yet within this dissolution lies an invitation, a return to something elemental. The Tao does not command, it simply reveals. To let go of the illusion of separateness is not to lose oneself, but to find a deeper belonging. The drop does not disappear into the ocean. It realizes it was never separate to begin with. The revolution at hand is not ideological, but perceptual. It is not about new doctrines, but about seeing with new eyes. The question is not whether we will adapt. The flow moves with or without us. The question is whether we will recognize that we were never outside of it all. To resist change is to resist existence itself. The illusion of control, the notion that we can impose order upon an ever-unfolding reality, is among the most persistent and deeply ingrained myths of human thought. We construct systems, erect walls, and fashion hierarchies in an attempt to stabilize the flux. Yet the closer we examine reality, the more it eludes our grasp. Control is not a law of nature, but a story we tell ourselves, a narrative woven to insulate us from the vertigo of uncertainty. Sartre called this realization terrifying, the awareness that meaning is not preordained but must be constructed moment by moment. Spinoza dismantled the fantasy of free will centuries ago, arguing that our choices and desires arise not from an autonomous self, but from a vast web of causes beyond our conscious apprehension. Modern neuroscience affirms this unsettling truth. Decisions can be predicted before they even surface in our awareness, their origins buried in the depths of unconscious processes. If our choices precede our knowing, what remains of agency? The Taoists anticipated this dilemma long before existentialists and cognitive scientists put words to it. They spoke of Wuwei, not inaction, but effortless action, a state of profound attunement with the currents of the world. It is not about surrendering to passivity, but about aligning with forces that exceed our control. The river does not impose its will upon the landscape. It moves with the shape of the earth, carving its path with time. To grasp this fully requires abandoning the linear, mechanistic logic that modernity has impressed upon us. The philosopher Timothy Morton describes hyperobjects, phenomena so vast in scale and duration that they exceed human comprehension. Climate change, global economic systems, artificial intelligence, these are not things to be controlled, but fields of interrelation in which we are already embedded. The economy, once imagined as a rational construct governed by predictable laws, now pulses with the chaotic energy of algorithmic trading, where machines execute the majority of global transactions in fractions of a second, moving faster than human cognition can process. The illusion of mastery does not simply waver, it shatters. But the collapse of control does not mean the collapse of action. It means the reconfiguration of what action looks like. Heidegger's being in the world suggests that engagement is not about imposition, but about resonance. To act is not to dominate, but to participate. The wind does not control the movement of the trees, yet it moves through them, shaping their motion. We, too, exist within a fabric of relations where force is not always the path to transformation. Sometimes it is alignment. The urgency of this shift is undeniable. The structures that once upheld the illusion of certainty are giving way, and what remains is an open field of possibility. The choice is not between control and chaos. It is between resisting the inevitable or learning to move with it. The world does not demand submission, only presence. To relinquish the need for mastery is not to become powerless. It is to step into a different kind of power altogether. The final illusion is control, the belief that we can impose order upon a universe that pulses with its own intelligence. This is the most persistent mirage, the one that undergirds not just our personal struggles, but the very foundations of our political, economic, and technological systems. We are conditioned to see power as the ability to dictate outcomes, to force the world into compliance with our desires. But reality resists. The deeper we probe into the workings of nature, the more we find self-organization rather than imposed structure, emergence rather than hierarchy. Michel Foucault argued that power is not merely something wielded by institutions or individuals. It is embedded in the very fabric of thought, shaping the way we see ourselves and the world. The concept of the sovereign individual, so deeply entrenched in Western ideology, is not a given but a historical construct, one reinforced by economic and political systems designed to preserve the illusion of control. But as these systems encounter the limits of their own logic, the cracks become impossible to ignore. Stuart Kauffman, exploring the principles of complexity theory, suggests that the universe is not governed by top-down design but by spontaneous self-organization. The patterns we see in nature, from the formation of galaxies to the behavior of ecosystems, arise not through centralized control but through the dynamic interplay of countless interdependent elements. The Taoists understood this centuries ago. The river does not need to know where it is going to reach the sea. It moves not by force, but by flowing with the contours of the world. To relinquish control is not to descend into chaos. It is to recognize that there is a deeper order, one that emerges not through domination, but through alignment. The greatest paradox is that real power does not come from imposing will upon the world, but from moving in resonance with it. To let go of the need for certainty is not to surrender agency, but to step into a form of action that is more fluid, more adaptive, more attuned to the realities of a shifting world. This is the lesson of Wuwei. Effortless action, not as inaction, but as a way of moving in synchrony with the larger patterns of existence. It is the difference between forcing a solution and allowing one to emerge, between rigid insistence and strategic responsiveness. The wind does not fight against the trees, it moves through them, shaping them over time. The river does not push its way forward, it follows the path of least resistance, carving the landscape with patience. In a time of accelerating change, this wisdom is more urgent than ever. The structures we have built, political, economic, even psychological, are proving insufficient to the complexity of the world they attempt to regulate. Attempts to exert control tighten the knots rather than unravel them. The only viable path forward is one of deeper attunement, of learning to listen to the rhythms of the world rather than imposing upon them. The Tao does not ask for belief. It does not demand allegiance, it simply is. And in the end, to recognize this is not to find a new truth, but to remember what has always been. To let go of control is not to disappear, but to expand, to dissolve into the movement that has always carried us. The flow does not need our permission. It has already begun. The only question is whether we will resist it or learn to move within its current. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking Podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. To learn more about the subjects covered today, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time.